10-year-old girl pressed herself into the far corner of a private banquet hall, pulling the sleeves of her lavender dress down past her wrists until only her fingertips showed, while 112 guests celebrated her birthday without once looking in her direction. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. A jazz quartet played near the bar. Waiters in black vests circled the room carrying champagne flutes and shrimp cocktails on silver trays. There were ice sculptures shaped like swans, a 3-tier fondant cake imported from a bakery in Manhattan, and floral centerpieces that smelled like someone had relocated an entire garden indoors. Every detail had been orchestrated with obsessive care. Every detail had been orchestrated with obsessive care. Every detail, except the one that mattered. The birthday girl was sitting alone and no one seemed to notice. Her name was Ivy Brannigan. She had just turned 10. 18 months ago, she had been a regular 4th grader who climbed trees, played tag during recess, and once ate an entire sleeve of Oreos on a dare. Then the fire happened. It started in the laundry room of their Connecticut home on a Tuesday evening in March. A faulty dryer vent. Ivy's mother, Karen, had been folding clothes when the flames erupted. She got Ivy out through a hallway window, but went back inside for the family dog. The firefighters found Karen on the 2nd-floor landing. She never made it out. Ivy survived, but the fire left deep scars across both her hands, her forearms, and a patch along the left side of her neck. The burns had healed as well as modern medicine allowed, but the skin remained tight, discolored, and unmistakably different. Ivy had learned quickly what different meant in the world of children. Stares at the pool. Whispers at school. A boy in her class once called her melted during lunch, and though the teacher intervened immediately, the word burrowed into Ivy's chest and stayed there like a splinter she could feel every time she moved. She stopped wearing short sleeves. She stopped raising her hand in class. She stopped accepting birthday party invitations from classmates. And slowly, without anyone charting the decline on a graph, Ivy Brannigan stopped believing she belonged anywhere people could see her. Her father, Elliot Brannigan, was 44 years old and the founder of Brannigan Pharmaceuticals, a company that had made him extraordinarily wealthy and extraordinarily busy. Before the fire, Elliot had been an involved father. Not perfect. He traveled too much and answered emails at dinner, but he showed up to school plays, taught Ivy to ride a bike, and spent Sunday mornings making terrible pancakes that they both pretended were delicious. After Karen died, something inside Elliot rearranged itself. Grief did not make him fall apart. It made him rigid. He responded to loss the way he responded to every crisis in business. He identified problems. He allocated resources. He executed solutions. Ivy needed skin grafts. He flew in the best plastic surgeon from Johns Hopkins. She needed therapy. He hired a child psychologist who charged $400 an hour. She needed normalcy. He enrolled her in the most exclusive private school in Fairfield County. She needed confidence. He bought her an entire new wardrobe, redecorated her bedroom, and promised her the most spectacular tent birthday party any child in Greenwich had ever seen. What Elliot did not do, because he did not know how, was sit with his daughter in the quiet and let her be sad. He could not fix sadness. He could not optimize it, delegate it, or throw money at it until it became something manageable. So he avoided it. He talked to Ivy about plans, schedules, and improvements. He asked her about grades and therapy progress. He told her she was brave and strong and that everything would get better. But he rarely asked her how she actually felt because he was terrified the answer would be something he could not solve. Tonight's party was the culmination of 3 months of planning. Elliot had rented the Hartwell Grand Ballroom at one of the most prestigious hotels in Stamford. He'd invited everyone: Ivy's classmates, their parents, his business partners, board members, 2 state senators he played golf with, and a handful of clients whose children happened to be around Ivy's age. He told himself the adults were there because it was polite to include them. In truth, Elliot Brannigan had forgotten how to separate his personal life from his professional one. The two had merged completely after Karen's death. Work was where he felt competent. Fatherhood was where he felt lost. So he brought work into fatherhood and hoped no one would notice the seams. The result was a birthday party that looked like a corporate gala with balloons. Ivy sat at a round table near the back wall, the one closest to the emergency exit. She had chosen it deliberately. Her cake was displayed on a pedestal table in the center of the room, surrounded by sparklers that would be lit later, but Ivy had no intention of walking to it. Walking to the center meant walking past everyone. It meant arms exposed under overhead lighting. It meant eyes. A group of kids from her school had arrived early and played together near the photo booth. Two girls Ivy used to be close with, Addison and Harper, had waved at her from across the room. It was a kind wave. Genuine, even. But neither girl walked over, and Ivy understood why. They didn't know what to say. Most adults didn't know what to say either. People treated her scars like a password-protected topic. They looked, then looked away. They started sentences and abandoned them. The politeness was almost worse than cruelty because at least cruelty was honest. Politeness just made Ivy feel like a problem everyone had agreed to ignore. Across the room, Elliot was deep in conversation with Martin Cole, his chief financial officer, about a pending FDA approval. He had checked on Ivy once, about 40 minutes ago. She had said she was fine. He had believed her because believing her was easier than investigating further. Now he stood with his back to her table, holding a glass of sparkling water, laughing at something Martin said, completely unaware that his daughter had started counting the tiles on the ceiling because she had run out of ways to pretend she was having fun. That was the moment Tamara Reeves walked into the ballroom holding a tray of backup desserts and her 8-year-old son's hand at the same time. Tamara was 37. She was not a guest. She worked as a part-time catering assistant for the hotel's event team, picking up weekend shifts to supplement her full-time job as a burn unit nurse at Bridgeport Hospital. Tonight's shift had come together last minute, and her usual babysitter had canceled, so she'd brought her son, Micah, with strict instructions to sit quietly in the service hallway and read his Captain Underpants book until her shift ended. Micah had lasted approximately 22 minutes before wandering through a propped-open service door into the ballroom. He was a small kid with oversized glasses and a gap-toothed grin and the kind of restless curiosity that made sitting still physically painful for him. He spotted the ice sculptures first, then the dessert table, then the photo booth with silly props. Then, while scanning the room for the most interesting thing to look at, he noticed a girl sitting by herself at a table near the back. She was picking at the hem of her sleeve. She looked sad. Micah understood sad. His own father had left when Micah was 4, and there had been a stretch of months afterward when Micah's mother cried every night in the bathroom thinking he couldn't hear. He knew what it looked like when someone was trying very hard to be invisible. He walked over. Tamara saw him from the service entrance and nearly dropped the tray. She set it down quickly, apologized to the head caterer, and moved to intercept her son before he bothered one of the guests' children. But by the time she reached the table, Micah was already sitting in the chair next to Ivy, and he had asked her a question. "Is this your party?" Ivy looked startled. She glanced left and right as if checking whether the question was meant for someone else. Then she nodded. "Cool," Micah said. "How come you're not over there?" He pointed toward the dessert table. Ivy hesitated. "I don't know. Are you allergic to cake? My friend Jordan is allergic to cake." "Well, not cake. Eggs. But eggs are in cake, so." "I'm not allergic." "Then you should probably go get some. That cake looks insane." Tamara arrived at the table, slightly breathless, already forming an apology. "I'm so sorry, sweetie. He wasn't supposed to come in here. She stopped. She had seen the scarring on Ivy's neck where the dress didn't quite cover it. She recognized it immediately. 2nd and 3rd degree. Healed but contractured. Tamara had spent 11 years working with patients who carried those marks. She knew what they meant medically. She also knew from years of watching her patients navigate the world after discharge what they meant socially. Something shifted in Tamara's face. Not pity, recognition. She pulled out a chair and sat down. "I'm Tamara. This is Micah, who is clearly incapable of following instructions." She gave her son a look that was 1 part exasperation and 3 parts love. "Is it okay if we sit with you for a minute?" Ivy looked at Tamara, then at Micah, then back at Tamara. "You don't have to." "I know," Tamara said. "But you've got the best table in the room. Look at that view of the dessert spread. Strategic." A tiny crack appeared in Ivy's expression. Not a smile yet. Just the beginning of one. The facial equivalent of a door being unlocked but not yet opened. Micah, who had zero awareness of emotional subtlety and 100% commitment to whatever interested him at any given moment, pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. "Want to see my drawing? It's a T-Rex fighting a helicopter. The T-Rex is winning." He unfolded the drawing and placed it on the table between them. It was, objectively, a terrible drawing. The T-Rex looked like a lumpy potato with teeth. The helicopter appeared to be on fire, though Micah insisted that was engine smoke, not fire. There's a difference. Ivy studied it with the seriousness of an art critic, and then she laughed. It was a small laugh. Quiet, surprised. Like her body had done it before her brain could intervene, but it was real. Tamara felt the weight of it. She had heard that kind of laugh before. In the burn unit, there came a moment in every patient's recovery when they laughed for the first time after the injury. It never happened during therapy sessions or inspirational speeches. It always happened during something ordinary. A dumb joke, a dropped spoon, a dog video on someone's phone. The laugh mattered not because it was loud, but because it was involuntary. It meant a body had briefly forgotten to be guarded. "Okay," Ivy said, still looking at the drawing, "but the helicopter should have missiles." "It does," Micah said, pointing to what appeared to be a series of small dashes near the bottom. "Those are missiles. Those look like raindrops. They're stealth missiles. They're supposed to look like raindrops." Ivy laughed again, louder this time. Tamara leaned back in her chair and let it happen. She didn't rush the moment. She didn't ask questions about school or therapy or how Ivy was feeling. She just let two kids be kids. Over the next 20 minutes, something quietly extraordinary unfolded at that corner table. Micah showed Ivy 3 more drawings, each worse than the last. Ivy offered artistic critiques that grew increasingly bold and funny. Micah asked if Ivy had any paper so they could draw together, and Tamara produced a small notebook from her bag, the one she used to track shift schedules, and tore out blank pages. They drew competing dinosaur battle scenes. Ivy used her left hand to hold down the paper and her right to draw, and at one point her sleeve rode up past her wrist, exposing the scarred skin along her forearm. She didn't pull it back down. Micah didn't look at the scars, not because he was trained or coached, but because he was 8 years old and more interested in whether Ivy's pterodactyl had laser eyes. Children are not born with the instinct to avoid. They learn it. Micah had not yet learned it, and in that gap existed something Ivy had not experienced in months: the absence of judgment. From across the ballroom, Elliot Brannigan saw his daughter from the corner of his eye. He'd been mid-sentence about quarterly earnings when something pulled his attention sideways. Movement. Sound. Something unfamiliar. He turned and saw Ivy sitting with a woman and a boy he did not recognize. They were drawing. Ivy was leaning forward. Her posture was different. Normally she folded inward, shoulders curved, chin down, occupying as little space as possible. Now she was leaning toward the other kid, pointing at something on the table, her arm extended. Her sleeve was pushed up. She was talking. Elliot stared. He excused himself from the conversation without finishing his sentence and walked halfway across the room before stopping. He stood near a column and just watched. Ivy was smiling. Not the thin, automatic smile she gave him when he asked if she was okay. A real smile, the kind that used her whole face. The kind he hadn't seen since before the fire. He felt something tighten in his chest, not pride, not relief, shame. He had spent $30,000 on this party. He had hired a professional event planner, a jazz quartet, a photo booth company, a custom cape designer, and an ice sculptor. He had invited every person he thought mattered. And his daughter was laughing for the first time all night because a kid in glasses showed her a bad drawing of a dinosaur. Elliot stood there for a long time. He watched Tamara hand Ivy a crayon. He watched Micah accidentally knock a cup of water off the table and all 3 of them laughing about it. He watched Ivy tuck her hair behind her ear with her scarred hand, unself-consciously the way she used to before the fire. Something Karen used to do. The shame deepened. It was the specific, lacerating kind that comes not from doing something wrong, but from realizing you've been doing the wrong thing with great effort and good intentions. Elliot had tried so hard to fix Ivy's world that he'd forgotten to simply be in it with her. He waited until there was a natural pause in the conversation, then approached the table slowly. He crouched down next to Ivy's chair, the way he used to when she was small, and looked at the drawings spread across the table. "What's happening here?" he asked softly. "Dinosaur war," Ivy said. "Micah's pterodactyl has laser eyes, but mine has a force field, so that seems unfair." "Force fields are a legitimate defense strategy, Dad." Elliot looked at her face. Really looked. He saw the animation in her eyes, the color in her cheeks, the completely unguarded quality of her expression. He felt his throat tighten. He turned to Tamara. "I don't think we've met. Tamara Reeves. I'm with the catering team tonight. Micah here decided the service hallway wasn't exciting enough." "I'm glad he did." There was a pause. Elliot wanted to say more. He wanted to say thank you, or I'm sorry, or I think I've been failing my daughter in a way that's hard to explain. But he was a man who'd built his career on controlled communication, and right now every word felt too big and too small at the same time. Tamara read his face. She'd spent years reading the faces of parents in the burn unit. The ones who brought flowers and expensive pajamas and iPads loaded with games, and then stood in the doorway looking helpless because they knew, somewhere beneath the optimism, that gifts could not undo what had happened. She recognized the expression. It was the look of someone who had just discovered the distance between providing and connecting. "She's a great kid," Tamara said. It wasn't a platitude. It was a fact offered gently, a bridge for a man who didn't know how to cross. Elliot nodded. He pulled up a chair and sat down at the table. Not at the head, not across from Ivy. Right next to her. Their shoulders almost touching. "Can I draw one?" he asked. Ivy looked at him with visible surprise. In 18 months of recovery, her father had never sat down and done something pointless with her. Everything had been structured, therapeutic, goal-oriented. Art therapy with a licensed professional. Adaptive sports programs. Educational enrichment activities. Nothing had just been drawing dinosaurs at a table. "You can't draw, Dad. How bad can it be?" "Really bad. Worse than his?" Elliot pointed at Micah's pterodactyl. "Hey," Micah said, offended. "Let's find out," Ivy said, offended. "Let's find out," Ivy said, and pushed a blank piece of paper toward her father. Elliot Brannigan, a man who managed a $4 billion company and had once negotiated a hostile takeover during a transatlantic flight, picked up a green crayon and tried to draw a triceratops. It looked like a deflated flated football with horns. Micah declared it the worst dinosaur in history. Ivy laughed so hard she put her head down on the table. Tamara covered her mouth, trying not to laugh because she was technically still on the clock. For the next hour the party continued around them, but the energy at that corner table existed in its own atmosphere. More children eventually wandered over, drawn by the sound of laughter. 2 girls Ivy knew from school, Addison and Harper, joined the drawing contest. A boy named Jordan asked if he could make a volcano. The table grew crowded and loud and chaotic. The jazz quartet was drowned out by kids arguing about whether a stegosaurus could beat a shark. The custom cake sat untouched in the center of the room while the birthday girl drew terrible dinosaurs at a corner table and didn't care. At one point, Tamara started to stand. Her shift was ending. She needed to clock out, collect Micah, catch the 9:15 bus home. But Elliot caught her eye and asked, quietly, if she could stay. Not as staff, as a guest. Tamara hesitated. She was wearing her catering uniform, black pants, white shirt, comfortable shoes that did not match the designer outfits in the room. She looked around at the crystal and the ice sculptures and the women in cocktail dresses. "I'm not exactly dressed for this." "Neither is the Triceratops," Elliot said, pointing at his drawing, "and he's the life of the party." Tamara sat back down. When it was finally time to cut the cake, Elliot did something he had not planned. Instead of having the event coordinator manage the ceremony, the way it was outlined in the 17-page event brief, he asked Ivy if she wanted to walk to the cake table. Not asked as in suggested. Asked as in genuinely left the decision with her. "You don't have to," he said. "We can bring it over here." Ivy looked at the cake table. It was in the center of the room. Under the brightest chandelier, She would have to walk past the board members, the senators, the parents who always glanced at her neck and then glanced away. 18 months of instinct told her to stay hidden. But Micah was standing next to her, holding a crayon behind his ear like a pencil, and Tamara was at her other side, and her dad was right there, not checking his phone, not talking to Martin Cole, just there. And something about the combination of those three people made the distance to the cake table feel shorter than it had all night. "I'll walk," Ivy said. They went together. Not in formation. Not like an escort, just a man and his daughter and a catering worker and her kid, moving through a crowd that parted slightly without understanding why the moment mattered. Ivy's sleeves were still pushed up. The scars on her forearms were visible under the chandelier light. She did not pull them down. She blew out the candles on the first try. Micah clapped too loudly. Tamara's eyes were wet, though she would deny it later. Elliot stood behind his daughter with his hand on her shoulder and realized, with a clarity that only arrives when you stop thinking and start feeling, that this was the first moment in 18 months where he had been fully present with his child. Not planning the next step, not evaluating her progress, not building the scaffolding of a normal life around her. Just standing there, watching her blow out candles, being her father. The party wound down after that. Guests left in waves. The event team began clearing tables. Tamara gathered Micah's scattered drawings into a pile and started to leave. But Elliot stopped her near the exit. He stood in front of her for a moment without speaking. Elliot Brannigan had delivered keynote speeches to audiences of 3,000. He had testified before congressional committees. He had negotiated contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars without breaking a sweat. But standing in front of a woman in a catering uniform who had done nothing more extraordinary than sit down at a table, he could not find a single adequate sentence. "I don't know how to thank you," he said finally. Tamara tilted her head. "For what? For what?" He gestured vaguely toward the corner table. "I spent a year and a half trying to fix everything for her. Doctors, therapists, tutors, programs. I thought if I built the right environment she'd be okay. But tonight, she laughed because your son drew a potato with teeth and called it a dinosaur." Tamara smiled. Kids don't need the right environment. They need the right people. And sometimes the right person is just someone who shows up and isn't afraid to sit next to them. She said it simply, the way someone states a thing they've learned not from books but from the daily accumulation of ordinary experience. It was not a grand philosophical insight. It was a practical observation from a woman who had spent a decade watching burned children return to the world and knew exactly what made the difference. Elliot heard it. He really heard it. "I work in the burn unit at Bridgeport," Tamara added. "I see a lot of parents who love their kids more than anything and still can't figure out why all the best resources aren't enough. It's not a failure. It's just that recovery doesn't happen in a doctor's office. It happens in the ordinary moments." Drawing at a table. Arguing about dinosaurs, sitting close enough that they can feel you there. Elliot nodded. He looked down at his shoes. Italian leather. $600. He was standing in $600 shoes in a ballroom that cost $20,000 to rent, and the most valuable thing that had happened all night had cost nothing. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure." "The scars. You saw them and you didn't do the thing, the look-away thing?" Timmer's expression softened. "I see scars every day. They're just part of a person. Same as freckles or a crooked tooth. It's not the scars that isolate kids. It's the way everyone else reacts to them." She paused. Ivy doesn't need people to pretend the scars aren't there. She needs people who see them and stay anyway. That sentence entered Elliot Brannigan's chest and detonated quietly. In the weeks that followed, things changed. Not with the dramatic velocity of a movie montage, but with the slow, uneven rhythm of real life. Elliot cut his word travel in half. His board questioned the decision. He let them question it. He started coming home by 5:30. He ate dinner with Ivy at the kitchen table instead of in his home office. The dinners were awkward at first. He didn't know how to talk to his daughter about things that weren't logistics, but he tried. He asked about her drawings. He asked about her friends. He asked one evening in November how she felt about the scars. Ivy was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I feel like everyone sees them before they see me." Elliot put down his fork. "I think I've been doing that too. Not the scars, but I keep seeing the accident, the hospital, everything that went wrong, and I forget to see you. Just you, right now." Ivy looked at him with an expression that broke his heart and rebuilt it in the same instant. "That's okay, Dad, you're trying." He was trying. He was trying, imperfectly, inconsistently, with all the clumsiness of a man who had spent 2 decades solving problems professionally and was now attempting to do the one thing that cannot be solved. But he was there. And being there, as Tamara had said, was the thing that mattered. Tamara and Micah became a recurring presence in their lives. Not because Elliot pursued a relationship, though something warm and tentative was growing between them, but because Micah and Ivy had become friends in the irreversible way that children do when they share one good experience together. They had sleepovers. They drew increasingly elaborate and increasingly terrible battle scenes. Micah introduced Ivy to his friends at school, and because Micah treated Ivy with total normalcy, his friends followed his lead. Children learn exclusion from adults, but they can also learn inclusion from each other. And sometimes all it takes is one kid who never got the memo that someone is supposed to be different. 3 months after the party, Elliot did something that surprised everyone who knew him. He established a foundation through Brannigan Pharmaceuticals called the Visible Project, dedicated to funding social reintegration programs for children with burn injuries and visible differences. Not medical treatment. The company already funded that. Social reintegration, art programs, peer mentoring, inclusive recreation, community workshops that taught adults and children how to interact with visible difference without awkwardness or avoidance. The programs were designed in consultation with burn unit nurses, including Tamara, whose practical expertise shaped every detail. At the foundation's launch event, a reporter asked Elliot what inspired the initiative. He considered giving the polished answer his PR team had prepared. Instead, he said, "My daughter sat alone at her own birthday party. I spent $30,000 making everything perfect, and she was invisible. A woman from the catering team and her 8-year-old son sat down next to her and drew dinosaurs, and my daughter smiled for the first time in months. I realized I had been investing in everything except what actually mattered." The quote was picked up by several outlets. It resonated because it was honest, because every parent who has ever confused effort with presence recognized themselves in it. Because the distance between loving your child and being available to your child is one of the most common and least discussed failures of modern parenthood. On Ivy's 11th birthday, there was no ballroom, no jazz quartet, no ice sculptures, no senators. The party was in the Brannigans' backyard. Tamara made her grandmother's coconut cake. Micah brought a new drawing, a collaborative dinosaur mural he and Ivy had been working on for weeks. 12 kids came, most of them from Ivy's school, and they played games that required absolutely zero planning and cost absolutely $0. Ivy wore a short-sleeved shirt. Her scars were visible. No one stared, not because they had been told not to, but because in the 10 months since the last birthday, Ivy had slowly surrounded herself with people who saw her completely and stayed. That evening, after the guests had gone and Micah was asleep on the living room couch with frosting on his glasses, Ivy found her father cleaning up in the kitchen. She walked up to him and hugged him. Not a quick, obligatory hug. A real one, the kind where she pressed her face against his chest and stayed. "Thanks, Dad," she said. "For what?" "For showing up." Elliot put his arms around his daughter and held her. He thought about Karen. He thought about the fire. He thought about all the months he had spent building elaborate structures around his grief instead of walking through it. He thought about a woman in a catering uniform who sat down at a table because she understood something he had spent a fortune trying to learn. You can spend a lifetime building the perfect world for someone you love and still miss the simplest truth. People don't need perfect worlds. They need someone willing to sit beside them in the imperfect one. Someone who sees them. Someone who stays. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is pull up a chair and say, "Is it okay if I sit here?" The answer almost always is yes.